Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second hybrid session of the semester. As you can see in front of you, there are 5 major items that I was going to cover in class tonight. So what I'm going to end up doing is creating 2 separate screencasts for you. The first one is going to focus on these first 2 items here at the top, and the second video is going to focus on the readings. The first item here is all about the Argumentative Strategies graphic organizer I created for all of you to help organize the notes we'll be taking on each of the 4 argumentative strategies that we're going to discuss, as well as the readings related to each strategy. And then I'm going to go over a Google Slides presentation that I created that provides you an overview of the first strategy, which is rebuttal arguments. Okay. This is the Argumentative Strategies graphic organizer, and the document is available for you in Blackboard under the Argumentative Essays content folder. You'll have to create a copy for yourselves. That way, if you want to type directly into the document, you'll have that access. Otherwise, if you prefer to write things by hand, just go ahead and print yourselves out a copy of it and take notes by hand. As you can see, things kind of like break down as we go forward. So generally speaking, there are multiple argumentative strategies, and then I've categorized them based on the 2 different essays that you're going to write. So for argumentative essay number 1, you're going to have a choice between rebuttal arguments and evaluative arguments in terms of which strategy you choose as the basis of your first essay. For right now, we're going to focus on rebuttal arguments, and you'll see that there's 2 separate sections under each strategy. The first is general notes about the strategy itself. So what you'll do is, for instance, during this upcoming presentation, you'll type in your notes right here in this column, or if we were in class, you would hand write them in the column. And then under it, you'll have a column for notes about the readings. And again, you'll either type in there or you can do it by hand, whatever you prefer. So before I move into the next Google Slides presentation, I want you to have this document out either on your desk as a hard copy or online on your computer. That way you can access it. And then as I go through the Google Slide presentation, I want you to type or write notes about what the heck a rebuttal argument is, okay? So, to begin, an argumentative strategy provides writers with a different purpose each time they write an essay. If we think back to core value number 3, it states that writing is shaped by audience, purpose, and context. So for each of the 4 strategies, you'll have a different purpose in mind, and that way it helps differentiate what you say, how you say it, why you say it, and the types of sources you use to help you say it. Our first is going to be rebuttal arguments. And rebuttal arguments arise when you possess strong amounts of resistance to or doubts about another writer's argument. If you think back to the type of sources that I was requiring you to find a couple weeks ago, one of them was supposed to be a source that you disagreed with. And the reason I made you do that is because I had this strategy in mind. So if you were interested in trying to do this strategy for your first essay, at least you had a source already chosen that you disagreed with. So you're kind of already ahead of the game. Thank you, Mr. Thierry. No, you're very welcome. Anyway, your resistance or doubts must stem from a shared interest in the general topic. So what that means is there's no point in writing a rebuttal argument if your topic is, let's say, genetically modified food, but the argument that you're going to disagree with talks about nuclear war. You want to make sure that the article has the same shared interest in the same topic that you do. And that way, you're disagreeing with apples and apples as opposed to apples and oranges. Okay, so before you compose a rebuttal, you have to genuinely understand the writer's argument. And I can't emphasize that enough. Nothing will make you seem like less of a credible writer than if you don't understand what the other person is saying. It goes back to credibility, it goes back to believability, authority, all those really important concepts that impact your influence as a writer. And part of showing your understanding of an argument is being able to objectively summarize the article's main claims. So, what do I mean by objectively summarizing its main claims? Well, let me move forward to the next slide, and then I'll come back to this one. So, There's multiple ways to write a summary, one of them being biased and one of them being objective. And it's all about you being able to detach your opinions from how you're presenting the information to somebody else. Because you never know. The person who reads your rebuttal might agree with the source that you are trying to disprove. So it helps your case if you prove to your reader that you can remove all of those emotions and just present the quote-unquote facts of the original source. So as I've done for you here, I provided a snippet of a biased summary and a snippet of an objective summary. And as I read them out loud, I just want you to pay attention to the specific words that the writer uses that help us understand why the first example is biased. So, in a biased article lacking scientific understanding of biotechnology, natural foods huckster Lisa Turner parrots the health food industry's party line that genetically altered crops are Frankenstein's monsters run amok. And before we break it down, let's read the objective summary. In an article appearing in a nutrition magazine, health food advocate Lisa Turner warns readers that much of our food today is genetically modified using gene-level techniques that differ completely from ordinary crossbreeding. So, once I've read them out loud, I assume that it's very obvious as to why that first one is biased. Our first keyword here is the writer immediately says this article is biased. Well, you think it's biased. That doesn't mean that everyone thinks it's biased. It immediately criticizes the basis of the author's argument, saying that it lacks scientific understanding. The fact that the writer then calls Lisa Turner a huckster doesn't necessarily give us the best idea of who she is. Why can't we just say natural foods advocate, just like the second version of the summary does? But then, to add insult to injury, the writer also says that Lisa Turner parrots the health food industry's party line to convey that this writer doesn't believe that Lisa Turner has her own opinions, that she's just kind of a mouthpiece for a larger industry, which immediately damages Lisa Turner's credibility, if she had any to begin with. And then the writer creates this fancy metaphor, or this very vivid metaphor of genetically altered crops as being Frankenstein's monsters. So although it's a creative technique, it's definitely biased in the sense that the writer is relying on us to understand that Frankenstein's monster was just that, a monster. So the writer is depending on us to share their very skewed version or understanding of that novel, of that movie, to help sort of get us on board with them. Whereas in the objective summary, all it says is it refers to it as an article. It gives us information about where it appears. It uses a much more neutral term by calling Lisa Turner an advocate for health food. And notice how this second part has no bias whatsoever. It's just presenting the idea that Turner believes that the strategies involved in genetic modification are different from ordinary crossbreeding. Perfect. There's no sense of what that person believes because it solely focuses on what the heck is Lisa Turner doing, okay? So, you've written that objective summary. You then want to go ahead and identify exactly what you oppose in the writer's argument. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and start refuting it, okay? So, technically, there are multiple ways to approach rebuttal. One of them is refutation, and the other one is counter-argument. And I'm assuming that many of you have heard the term counter-argument before, where maybe in Comp 1 or in some of your classes in high school, your teachers would have required you to include a counter-argument in your paper to show the, quote, other side. And while that's absolutely true, it's not exactly a rebuttal. So we're going to focus in this class on refutation. So refutation focuses on the shortcomings of a specific opposing argument, and it takes its structure from that argument. So what you would do is you would lay out what's the opposing argument, number one, in that original source. What is your refutation? Sort of like a tit for tat. Opposing argument, your refutation. Next opposing argument, your refutation, etc. Counter arguments, on the other hand, focus on a broader idea or understanding about the topic. So it's a widely held belief, a general gap in knowledge or understanding, or different approaches to a problem. And that doesn't mean that counter arguments are bad, it's just that their intention is slightly different. Because counter arguments don't focus on a specific author's ideas like a refutation does. So if you were to do a counter argument for a totally different essay, not for this class, you would follow the structure where there's an argument that's widely held and you would provide your counter argument, and you cycle between those two. So if you choose to do a rebuttal argument for this essay, you're going to follow the refutation structure that I outlined very briefly above, right up here. And I'm going to provide some strategies for you on the next slide. So, strategies for refuting an argument. As I mentioned earlier, you can really oppose an argument for all kinds of reasons. And these strategies kind of refer to all those different reasons. The first is you can disprove the truth of the data or evidence, which will require you to do a little bit more digging to figure out, is that evidence actually accurate? Does it come from a reputable source? Cite counterexamples. So if, for example, your opposing argument were to provide one personal anecdote of a person who claims they developed autism because of a vaccine, what you would want to do is say, while that person's story may or may not be true, here are multiple counterexamples that prove that vaccines almost always do not result in autism. That's kind of what you would do for that second strategy. And that relates kind of to the third one. You would cast doubt on the recency, relevance, representativeness, or sufficiency of the data or evidence. And what that means is, did the person cherry pick the one time someone developed autism as a result of a vaccine, or the one time that someone got food poisoning from Chipotle? That sort of thing. So you want to be able to prove that this particular piece of evidence is not representative of the wider topic, that it's not common, to put it another way. You want to question the credibility of the author or the data and evidence. So making sure you do a little bit of a background search on the author. What authority do they have to write about this topic? Or what are their political biases or political affiliations that might skew how they talk about a topic? So for instance, if an article about how oil is the future is written by someone who is getting paid by big oil, obviously that person's not the most credible source. The next thing is questioning the accuracy of the quoted evidence or terminology, which would require you to go back to the original source, figure out, was it taken out of context? Next, you want to question how the author interprets the information. So, what that means is the information they provide might be legitimate. It might sound perfectly reasonable, but perhaps you just don't agree with how they interpret it. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to disagree with literally everything, but at least you're giving them credit where it's due. Yes, the information is accurate. It comes from a credible source, but they just do not interpret it correctly. Next, and finally, you want to direct your reader's attention only to the major flaws in the opposing argument that matter the most. So, for instance, if there's one word misspelled, you do not want to rake the author over the coals solely because they misspelled there or whatever other word. That's not really the most important thing here, okay? So, by the end of this video, what I want you to do is make sure that you have that notes section filled out, okay? And then by the end of the next video, I will describe what you'll need to do for the assignment, okay? So stay tuned, and I will talk to all of you shortly.